Salutations, patience, and welcome to another episode of Doc Docs Reviews, your premier documentary review show. Now, I know it's been a minute, about a year since my last video on the channel, because I'm just working on some, bigger scale stuff. But every year, I do like to keep up with my documentaries, and I have this year, especially towards the end of the year, had a chance to catch up on a few really buzzed about documentaries from 2019. So I just couldn't let the beginning of 2020 pass without reminiscing over the past year's docs and hopefully just putting my list out there for other people to check out these documentaries and learn about these really wildly different and interesting topics that I think more people should be aware of. So without further ado, I want to count down my top 5 documentaries of 2019. And there was some great ones, so let's get into it. Ooh, Fire! So this is the Netflix documentary about the failed Fire Music Festival in 2017. You may have heard of it. It was obviously a disaster that Billy McFarland was the helm of, essentially to promote his app called Fire, the artist music booking app. And this is just about marketing sort of this grandeur, amazing big thing on social media, and ultimately it being disappointing and not what it said it was gonna be. And there's a greater point to be made about, social media culture, false advertising in the news, what's real, what's fake, and what people put out there. The fraudulent activity that McFarland was involved in, trying to get investors and making false promises. It just really gave you a good base for how all of this happened and every sort of step along the way, how they tried to solve problems, but they just kept running into problem after problem. And it was just almost comical. At a certain point, you're like, yeah, it's just not possible. And then you realize what kind of person McFarland is and the companies that he's had in the past, and it's gonna lead to a disaster. There's not anything spectacular about this documentary. It's very by the numbers as far as interviews go and B-roll, and it's pretty traditional in that sense. But I still highly recommend you check it out on Netflix right now. So let's go to the number 4. Knock down the house. Knock down the house. Knock down the house. Is also a 2019 Netflix documentary that follows 4 women running for Congress in their various states. And it's very much grassroots, no corporate money, no political experience. They work with this committee called the Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats. It sort of just jumps around between these women campaigning, or just fighting for their different issues that they personally have investment in. I took the pushes for all of them as a really cool marketing lesson, actually. There were a few interesting scenes about them handing out flyers, talking to people in person, just facing rejection and getting back up and trying. They compared like the little flyer pamphlets of Joe Crowley's campaign to vote in the primaries with Alexandria's, and just her pointing out the date wasn't on the front page, and what he was advocating for wasn't anywhere in the pamphlet, but Alexandria's was very much focused on these points: the name, the date of the primary, and what she stood for in both English and Spanish. So that was sort of cool. It's a deep dive into what sort of campaigning like that looks like on a grassroots level. It was definitely sort of one-sided, but I sort of accepted that because we are following these women, and I sort of knew that coming in, so maybe it was a little bit easier for me to handle that. And it was definitely more focused on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as opposed to the other women. It made sense why that was the case, but I would have liked to maybe see more of the other women in the aftermath of their campaigns. But despite that, really enjoyed it, which is why it is at my number 4. All right, moving on. Apollo 11. Now, I saw this film about a year ago in IMAX, and I'll just say, like, this is the definitive film, the definitive piece of media to watch about the Apollo 11 mission, where Neil Armstrong is the first man to walk on the moon. The images, the sound, the score, it stuck with me almost a year later, and it's just a spectacle. They took, thousands of hours of footage and, tens of thousands of hours of audio and constructed this amazing linear piece of, real footage that they hadn't used before. It was just archival footage that they, digitized and sifted through to make this complete package of a movie. And it's just amazing to think about someone having to take that task on and accomplishing it with such great skill. The soundtrack is so good. It's got this spacey vibe, but also feels of that time, sort of that analog synthy sound. And then just all the little moments that you've seen before, and you obviously know what happens, but there's so much suspense within it. For example, the landing scene, you sort of see, out the window, the rocks beneath, and it's just terrifying seeing that so close. You feel that suspense even though you know what's gonna happen. Probably the best media on that experience that you can show someone, and it's still great, in a format that's online. It's still very educational and looks great. So it's one small step for man, one giant leap for documentaries. That's good. Honeycomb is actually really good for you. It's really healthy for you. That's a health tip. It's good for heart health and fighting infections. So if you ever see one of these, get the honey with the honeycomb. Anyways, why am I talking about honey? Because my number 2 documentary of 2019 is Honeyland. I think the filmmakers really did a great job capturing the mountains of Macedonia, and we follow basically a beekeeper who cultivates bees for honey in this very traditional way, as she also takes care of her ailing mother. It just feels like it's a place removed from time. No technology, no running water, no roads. It's just so peaceful and serene until the crux of the movie, where neighbors come in. And we've all heard the story about, the new neighbors being loud and boisterous, and it's sort of this contrast between the old and the modern, because they come in like a caravan and they have a bunch of kids and they're loud, and they also take up beekeeping. She sort of gives them advice on how to do it because she's a nice person. And then it just sort of takes a turn because the husband gets greedy. And so we have this dichotomy between the greedy people who have moved in and just want to take all the honeycombs, but her rule is you have to leave a little bit. You have to leave half of that for the bees. You can't take all of it. And you see, these interactions in such a natural way, but it's so cinematic. And so it's just a testament to how they captured these moments. Just an amazing, amazing tale. I just encourage everyone to go watch this, because it's a look in a place in the world that you don't get to see very often. And it has some great takeaways there about consumerism as a whole, and greed, and appreciating nature, and sort of leaving a little bit for the nature to regenerate. And I just thought that was so beautiful. So Honeyland could have easily been my number 1 documentary, but alas, there is one more. Until then, I'm gonna have a little snack. Here it is. Are you ready for it? Ladies and gentlemen, I present you the best documentary 2019, One Child nation. This documentary exposes truths, but not just from anyone. From someone who was close with it, whose family suffered from it. We hear directly from the people responsible for enforcing China's one-child policy. And it's heartbreaking, yet some of these people say it was for the greater good because of all this propaganda, which is why I have the mic, obviously, that said this was a thing that was gonna save China from overpopulation and famine because of the lack of resources, and just make the quality of life better for every family. It's really interesting how the director, Nanfu Wang, puts herself in the documentary because it's necessary, it's personal for her, being a new mother and reconciling how she grew up, the landscape. She interviewed family members who were forced to get rid of their children. She interviewed village officials who forced abortions. She interviewed family planning officials and human traffickers who were sort of like vigilantes because they took the babies and put them in orphanages. I mean, we see fetuses in the garbage. We see families being detained for not adhering to the policy. It was just madness. But also, she never really indicted her subjects. She let them talk, even if they felt that it was necessary for the greater good, but obviously also told the stories of the horrible things that were happening. So ultimately, this documentary is a warning sign for policies like this occurring in other places in the world. And my favorite documentaries are ones that come from a personal place and unravel to reveal a deeper, more universal issue, and presents that information for people to take heed. You know, it's a powerful thing. So that's why it's my #1 documentary of 2019. All right, patients, that has been my top 5 documentaries of 2019. What did you think? Have you seen any of them? Are you interested in any of them based on my reviews? Did I miss any of them? I definitely probably missed a few. Maybe you made one. Anyways, let me know in the comments below. Until the next Docs Reviews, I have been Doc Hawk, and you have been prescribed.